Hello, William Grantsville Art Center community. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a monoprint. A monoprint is a printmaking technique. Unlike most printmaking techniques, a monoprint only produces one copy from the original, which is where you get the word monoprint from, mono meaning one or only. There are several different techniques that fall under the umbrella of monoprint, including lithography and etching and woodblock printing. I'm going to be teaching you how to make a print using an additive and subtractive processes on a pane of glass. You can also use plexiglass or even a Tupperware if you have access to that, and that's easier. But that surface that you see there is going to be serving as our block, where we'll directly be making images that we will then print by applying pressure using a brayer or another object to transfer the image from the block to our paper. Your block is going to need to be made from a flat, non-porous surface. I used glass from 2 old photo frames I didn't use anymore. I put white paper behind them and then cardboard and duct taped the sides, and that's how I made my block. You can also use plexiglass or Tupperware if it's flat, and you're also going to need something to apply the paint with. I got paint brushes, but you can use a lot of different objects. You're also going to want some paint. I used acrylic paint. You can also buy printmaking paint from the store. And I used the speedball brayer, and this is what I'm going to be using to apply pressure to transfer the print. I'll show you another object you can use as well later on in the video. And you're also going to need your paper. I suggest a heavy duty paper like watercolor that can absorb a lot of paint. You're also going to need something to clean your block in between each print. I used a paint scraper and a sponge, water, and paper towels. The first process I'm going to be showing you is an additive printmaking process. So go ahead and put your paint directly on the paper. I'm going to be using this half as a palette and half as my printing block. And go ahead and put the design directly on your pane of glass as if you were making a painting. Keep in mind that any print that you make is going to be printed backwards. So it's a mirror image more than a direct image that you're making. So keep that in mind as you're printing. You'll see this a little easier when we start printing with words. So go ahead and apply it directly, then get your paper and put it on top, and get your brayer and go ahead and take it to your paper, and you're just going to directly apply pressure. You're going to do it horizontally and vertically in both directions. And once you're done, you'll notice that the amount of paint that you put on your block is going to affect the print. When you put the paint on thick, you're going to be less likely to get the design that you made because the paint is going to spread as you apply pressure. You'll see that there's kind of a splat instead of a circle there because I put too much paint. So you'll want to apply the paint in a thin layer so that it's not too dry, so you'll still get a print out of it, but you don't want any raised edges unless that's the look that you're going for. And you can also apply layers as each paint print dries. So for example, I did squiggles earlier, black squiggles, and now I'm going to apply these orange eyes underneath. You're going to want to choose colors that have a good contrast or that layer on top of each other well. This is a good area to experiment with. And instead of using a brayer, in this instance I used a rolling pin from my kitchen, which is another way that you can apply pressure if you don't own a brayer. And you can see that they layered really nicely together. When this layer dries, I can apply another one using the same monoprint process. In an earlier video, I told you how you could use fruit or other objects to make prints. So I'm going to be applying paint to this halved lemon to make a print. This is also a kind of monoprinting. You can use these small objects or other objects or even handheld as your block. In this instance, I'm using this lemon. So I applied paint directly onto the lemon half, and from there I can directly apply it to where I want it to be on the print. And in this case, it's acting as a stamp, or which is another kind of type of monoprint, is to make a stamp. And this can be applied directly onto your paper. And you press down, and once you feel like you have pressed down enough, you can lift it up and you'll see that it's made a print. This stamp can be used more than once, and it will change depending on the amount of paint and pressure you put on the object that you're making a print from. In addition to an additive process, you can also use a subtractive process, and you're making monoprints in this way. So I've been using half of my block as a place to mix paint. So I'm mixing paint on one side, and then I'm going to show you two different techniques for making prints with lettering. And the first is going to be just the one that we've been using the entire time, which is additive. And you can see that when you're trying to make text in printmaking, you're going to have to make it backwards. So I'm writing the word blue, but if I want it to appear legible when I print it, it has to be in the opposite direction that I'm going to want it to be once it's printed on the block. So this is the additive process, and then the subtractive process is very similar, but what you do is, this is a mini version of it, you would put the paint first. You can even apply the paint directly onto just the block here and spread it in using your brayer, or using your brush or your hands even. And from that block of paint, you can even use your paint scraper to subtract the paint. But once you have a block of paint, basically, you're then going to take away paint in order to make the print. So I'm going to be using a Q-tip to subtract. You can use a brush, you can even use your fingers, but this is the subtractive process, is anytime that you are removing paint, and that is the way that you're going to be making your print, and that is the way that your line making and movement comes into the piece. You can use a variety of tools to do this. You can use the back of a paintbrush, you can use a paintbrush, you can use your hand. I'm using a Q-tip. You can also use your paint scraper. You can use a spoon or a fork. There's a variety of tools that you can use to make marks when you're doing a subtractive process. Again, you want to make sure that the paint layer that you're applying is fairly thin, but that it will still be able to make a print when you apply pressure, because you want to be able to you don't want the paint to bleed into the area that you're making clean for your print. So just play around with how much paint that you're using, but try using less at first if possible. And in the final print, you can see that the word blue is legible because on the original I put it backwards, and when you print it reverses the image. Another thing that's important to know is that when you're applying paint, whatever tool you use, because a lot of the layers you're going to be using are thin, it's going to pick up the mark making that you're making. So you can see that I'm making these yellow strokes really, I have a lot of movement, and you can see that it's kind of in like a zigzag pattern. When I print, it's going to actually pick that up. So you'll see I'm going to be applying this yellow on top of a blue that I printed earlier, just a blob of blue I printed. Because that's the other thing, you can also just print colors and layer them on top of each other. It doesn't always have to be an image, it doesn't always have to be a shape. You can also just print solids and then layer the shapes and words and text on top of it. So there's the solid blue that I'll put on top, and do the same process that I've been doing vertical and horizontal strokes. And once the print is done, you're going to be able to see the brush strokes that I made. So be really conscious with what tools you're using. You could see the brush strokes come out there. Be really conscious with the marks that you're making, even when you're just applying paint to the block, because it will have an effect on your final print. These are some of the prints that I made today. You can see that there's a big variety of marks and outcomes. So play around with the process and enjoy making your monoprints. You kind of never know what you're going to get, and it's a really interesting way to explore mark making and a new technique. Thank you for watching this video. For more arts and music instruction, check out William Grant Still Art Center social media pages.